and hopefully I think we're live on Facebook. And my guest today is none other than Howard Tullman. Howard began his professional career, which now spans 5 decades, as a lawyer, and entered the tech space in the early 80s. He went on to found and co-found more than a dozen successful tech companies. He's a regular contributor to the Inc.com news organisation, the author of no less than 24 publications, a prolific art collector and philanthropist, and until recently CEO of 1871, which is an incubator, accelerator and co-working space in Chicago that I think houses over 495 technology startups. Howard, welcome to the program.
I'm happy to be here.
So Howard, we'll kick straight off with one of your more well-known publications, and that is the Perspiration Principles. I think you're up to about volume 24.
That's about right, I think. And then we have some publications that are on specific topics as well, but I think we're up to number 24, give or take.
And so can you tell us what are the Perspiration Principles?
Well, the overall premise was just writing down the ideas that are important for entrepreneurs who are starting businesses. Specifically, the 5 sort of core principles are that you need to have a passion for what you're doing, that you need to take the time to prepare, so preparation, that you need to work hard, which is perspiration, that you have to be willing to persevere, because it's a long and bumpy road. And lastly, that you need principles, because if you're not in it to make a difference, if you're just in it to make a living, it's just too hard. And so it's really important that you have something greater than yourself that you're trying to accomplish.
So let's talk about startups and ecosystems. Can you tell us about 1871 and your experiences with early stage technology companies?
Sure. 1871 started in May of 2012 with about 50 companies, about 200 people, and about 50,000 square feet of space in a building in downtown Chicago that was really being transformed. It had been around for decades, maybe as long as 100 years. But it was an old line building with showrooms and apparel and furniture and things like that. And today it's completely transformed in many respects. But when we started, the idea was to build a town square, a central space where all of the resources and all of the components that it would take to assemble an ecosystem around starting businesses would be assembled in a contiguous space. And the contiguous space element was very significant. Since that time, we've grown from 50 companies to 500 companies, and from 50,000 square feet to about 170,000 square feet. Graduated about 250 companies. They've created about 10,000 jobs, new jobs, and raised about $300 million. So the idea started. We assembled the universities, we assembled venture funds, we assembled schools of our own, we assembled mini incubators within our larger incubators, hundreds and hundreds of mentors, thousands of events. We do about 1,000 events a year here. Tremendous educational resources, international connections across the world. And really the design was economic development, but also it was to put Chicago on the technology map on a global basis.
Wow. So I guess Australia's ecosystem is very early days, and some would argue, I think, that parts haven't even woken up to the birth of the new digital economy. And to some extent, I think Australia's rested on its laurels with its mining and resources driving its economy and selling houses to each other. We do that pretty well. And there's a sense that there's a bit of a gold rush that we're witnessing. There's lots of people jumping on the bandwagon. And I don't know whether we've seen a lot of output for that. So what advice would you give the leaders of our local ecosystem that you think would be helpful in cultivating an embryonic innovation ecosystem?
Well, I think that it's important to decide whether you're going to try to be all things to all people, whether you're going to focus on just a few areas. You mentioned mining. There are successful incubators throughout the world focusing on just a few things, a few domains or a few areas of industry or expertise. And that's something that's important, so that you stick to your knitting, so that you have the ability to add these new technologies to existing industry, which is a lot easier than trying to grow from zero to fully blown organizations. So number one is to understand what audiences you're going to serve. And then number two is to understand that you can't be all things to all people. So one of the issues that we see a lot is cities that start to do this, and they lose sight of simply serving the entrepreneurs and trying to build businesses, and they decide that they're community organizations chargeable with diversity, and they decide that they're required to help improve the educational systems of wherever they're at, and they decide that they need to engage in serving the entire city, and so providing economic development across the city. And what we found is it's if you chase too many rabbits, you end up with none, and that it's really important to focus. And that's, by the way, the exact same message that we would tell any individual entrepreneur, that you want to have a simple story, that you want to stay focused, that you want to grow ratably and iterate on a constant basis. And so I think that there's a dual message. One is it's important to get started, but two, it's important to nail it before you try to scale it, before you try to get beyond a certain size. And this also is a process that the best venture funds in the world take 3 to 5 years before they know whether any of their businesses are going to be successful. And one of the problems with community organizations and politicians in particular, local leaders, as you referred to, is they're not patient. And, you don't get to undertake this and say, oh, by the way, in 6 months, we'll have 3 more Facebooks and we'll have reinvented the world. And so you need to have, an agreement on metrics is really essential. Are you trying to create jobs? Are you trying to create businesses? Are you trying to take these technologies and make them available to the bigger organizations that already exist in your area? Each of those is a different set of objectives, and it's really critical to have clear leadership, and also to not be having so many people and so many cooks and chefs that you lose sight of the ability to be focused at all.
So, I suppose that relates to business and ecosystems in that regard. So, what are the questions, or the 3 questions that you asked to evaluate an early stage company?
Well, it's not 3, but it's close to 3. I mean, basically, what I would say is, when someone comes in here, our questions are very simple, but they're all about business, because we're basically a B2B incubator. We're focused on creating businesses that serve other businesses as opposed to consumers, because we just think it's almost impossible these days to successfully launch a consumer-facing business. So the questions that we ask are, tell me how you're going to save me money. How are you going to save me time? How are you going to make me more productive? How are you going to help me make better decisions? And basically, how are you going to make a difference? And those 5 questions are really the things that we feel like if you don't have a clear answer, then we're unlikely to be able to help you, and you're unlikely to build a successful business.
I might just get you.
I think when you look at any business, if they can't demonstrate along one of those dimensions a clear idea and some demonstration of value, then we don't think that's a business.
Okay, so let's move on to the future of education. I want to try and keep this interview fairly concise. You were among the first to bring what I would call disruptive innovation to education with Kendall Experiencer and Tribeca Flashpoint Media Arts. I might just get you to sit back a bit, Howard. I'm just saying that's better. That's better. So in each of these ventures, you created educational environments that feed creativity. But also providing the skill sets for future successful employment. And I also know you've been quoted as saying that in the future, or even, maybe now is the future, we're going to need to be creating jobs as opposed to looking for jobs. So how important is creativity going to be now and into the future?
I don't think that creativity is going to be as important as innovation. And the difference is a pretty important difference. I think of creativity as invention, and it's risky and it's difficult. We think that innovation is just incremental improvement. It's taking business processes, it's taking the way we've always done things, and adding pretty rudimentary solutions and technologies and new approaches to them to create really significant value. And so, our goal right now and our pretty consistent focus has not been to invent new things. It's been to take things that are existing and fairly common and help to improve and eliminate the inefficiencies in so many businesses today that are still doing things in backward fashions. And so I think that it's important to be creative in the arts. But in business, I think it's more important to be innovative, to understand that there are just enormous opportunities to raise the bar. And it's so easy to do that in so many different industries today that to think that you have to do something revolutionary is too big a hurdle. It's, Warren Buffett is fond of saying he doesn't want to, jump over 7-foot-high bars. He'd rather step over 1-foot-high bars. And he finds that to be much more lucrative. Right.
So with regard to our education system, I know that I mentioned to you that I've been a little bit frustrated with the education system. It feels like we've moved on, but in some regard, the education system hasn't. Do you think that our education system strips creativity from our kids?
Yeah, I think we're still in the mode of the old factory system, and the factory system of a classroom with one teacher and 25 students in rows was exactly modeled on the factory, and it was intended to have no creativity at all. It was to learn, first of all, it was a behavioral control system, and second of all, it was to learn to memorize. It was to learn procedures and rules and things and instructions, none of which is going to serve us very well going forward. I mean, I think that education is broken. I think we have to figure out ways to teach people how to think critically, how to solve problems, how to put themselves in the shoes of other people. I think that we do a lousy job of listening. And I think that the idea that a teacher can sit in front of a class of 25 people and that one size fits all is never going to work again, and it never probably worked in the past. So, we see students sitting in front of devices. We see each of them learning at their own pace and at a different pace. Some will be average, some will be ahead, some will be behind. The idea is they'll move at their own pace, and the teacher will intervene as sort of a guide and as an assistant rather than as the sage on the stage, as the pronouncement of all great wisdom. And so the schools are going to have to change very radically. We're seeing different designs. We're seeing the flipped classroom, which is the idea that you'll do your studying and your reading outside of class, and then when you come to class, you'll do problem-solving, interactive activities. You'll work in groups. I think most companies today have figured out that very little is done by individuals and a lot is done by teams. And so almost all the business schools have come around to this. I think we're going to see more of that in the schools as well.
So my parents' advice was, go to school, go to university, study hard, find a good company to work for. Should our generation, the X-Gens and the baby boomers, be passing that wisdom down to future generations?
Well, I've never understood these statistics that you're going to be working for 20 different companies in your lifetime and all these things, but I guarantee you that no one will be working for only one or two companies, and the prospect of lifetime employment is for sure gone. The bigger question is what kinds of jobs are under tremendous pressure, and we put those into three buckets, which I think are interesting because they tell you the kind of training that you're going to need to be successful. So the lowest bucket, the jobs that are most in jeopardy today, fit into the category of data processing, data collection, and essentially predictable physical work. Any set of systems where I can create a set of rules, where I can create a set of instructions, I can build a machine to perform those tasks, and those jobs are going away. The middle group, slightly less at risk, are jobs where you interact with people, with stakeholders, and that still needs to be done person to person. I mean, we need to have organizations like that, and also physical work that isn't predictable, that is sort of randomized. Those are protected jobs. The highest level of jobs, the jobs that are not going to be automated, are jobs that fit into two categories. One is managing other people, working with other people, collaboration and teamwork. And two, applying specific expertise that requires intellectual capacity to solve problems, to think critically. So across that spectrum, when you go backwards and you say, well, what kind of school should I go to? What should my plan be? Our focus increasingly is, how do we teach kids to think? How do we teach kids to react quickly, to make their arguments, to listen to other arguments, and then to decide for themselves how to proceed? And I think that we're seeing that the rate of change is accelerating. Today is the slowest rate of change in our lifetime, for sure. It's only going to get faster. And each change seems to be accelerating the next change coming down the pipe. So in this world, change is inevitable, and I think you have to assume that anything is subject to a very finite limitation on longevity.
Yeah, I think I saw an interesting quote from, I don't know whether it was your quote, but I saw it in a presentation that you gave, and it was that it's not the big eating the small, it's the fast eating the slow.
Yeah, everything today is about speed. Time is without doubt our scarcest resource. Everything is about not how fast you presently are performing your business, but how fast you're getting faster. How are you accelerating as opposed to measuring velocity? Because if you're not getting faster, there are hundreds of companies, many of them at 1871, that are just looking at the opportunities and the inefficiencies in the way that you perform your business and saying, I can do it better, faster, cheaper, more easily, more accessibly. And that's how the world is working today. Very few businesses, whether it's medicine, education, just about anything, they're all under attack, and that attack is accelerating.
So on that, the future of work, where I read a statistic that by the year 2020, which is not too far away, there's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 1.2 billion people worldwide that consider themselves digital nomads. And we're seeing the rise of places like Chiang Mai, that apparently has 30 to 40,000 digital nomads there at any point in time. Do you see that trend continuing to grow, that people are going to be moving and working remotely?
I think that the gig economy, the idea that you'll work sporadically, First of all, I completely agree that the models for traditional offices, for traditional central cities, even though we continue to move across the world into more and more people within cities, I think the model of the traditional offices will break down, because we're walking around powerfully connected. We're on call 24/7. We're going to be working whenever and wherever. And so that's going to be very different. But I think the idea of flitting from job to job, sort of the gig economy, or, this idea of the shared economy, is very problematic because I think the math doesn't work. I think it turns out that those people are going to be serfs, making very little money, having very little protection in terms of medical or insurance or anything like that. And that's not likely to lead to more income equality. It's likely to lead to whole populations of unhappy people. I say all the time that multitasking is a big lie that we tell to kids, or the kids tell to us, that they can watch video and play music and talk to their friends and chat and still do their homework. And we know better, but you have to be a certain age in order to appreciate that. And focus is tough. You know, we have a very open environment here, but we also had to create spaces that were quiet spaces and separate spaces because we were seeing people literally sort of leave the environment in order to go get work done. And so I think that we'll work in a lot of different places, and I think that that's fine, but I think we still need to address the attention deficit and the concentration issues. And, you know, when we see a lot of places that call themselves incubators that are actually just sort of glorified co-working spaces, it's also hard to assemble all the resources that really add value to people in the course of an environment like this.
So that's interesting. You talk about glorified co-working spaces. What's the differentiator between an incubator or a glorified co-working space, as you put it?
Well, I think that most of the co-working spaces are for-profit enterprises that are essentially looking for, how do I take rent from these companies and pay my bills and make a profit? We're a nonprofit. Our job is to make these companies successful. So in a typical co-working space, you won't have thousands of events that are educational events. You won't have thousands of mentors. This year, our mentors will provide 800 mentors will provide about 10,000 hours of one-on-one coaching. You won't have all of the sort of infrastructure. The technology here is all free. All the connectivity is free. And that's just a model. That's an ecosystem model. That's not really a commercial venture model. So when we see places, even like WeWork and some other places that have been, you know, remarkably successful marking up, you know, retail space, how long that model will be successful will depend on how healthy the economy remains. I think it'll be very difficult for them to pay for expensive office rent and mark it up for startups or for freelancers as soon as the economy softens a little bit and those freelancers aren't so free with their cash.
Right. So I think I talk to a lot of people. A lot of people ask me about what they should be recommending to their kids to study, and some are saying they need to get 2 degrees or 3 degrees, and I think a lot of people, certainly in my age group with young children, are concerned because they keep hearing about automation and robotics, and so I mean, how do we demystify the future for those people that feel like it's just moving at breakneck speed and they just simply can't keep up?
Well, I think first of all that we tell people who ask that specific question that there is no single silver bullet. It's not simply coding, although coding is an important way to teach your kids how to think and how to plan and how to organize their thoughts. And whether it's coding that in a year won't matter because, you know, Fortran and Cobalt and all these different forms of code don't mean anything today, but the methodology and the thought processes are, in fact, important. But what I would tell these people is that, I'd go back to what I said before, which is it's about problem solving, it's about working with other people, it's about critical thinking, but mostly it's about presenting yourself and your arguments effectively. And that's a set of communication skills. And if you look at the way people are behaving today, those are diminishing more rapidly than anything. You see people sitting around, whether with earpods or with, you know, their face in their phone or whatever, and we are losing that capability. We are losing that connection in many respects. But look, I don't know, I don't know that there is going to be an answer. And I think that, frankly, I'm not so concerned about the kids, because the kids are digital natives. You know, they can get this. We're the immigrants. What I'm concerned about is people who are 50 and up, because they're not going to do us the courtesy of dying when they're 60. And honestly, we need to give them new skills, or else they're going to be useless in the workforce. And they're going to be unemployable, but they're going to be around for 20 more years. And very few companies, very few organizations or governments are even remotely committed to upskilling the existing workforce, the employed workforce, forget the unemployed, the employed workforce. If they're not upskilled with these new digital skills and capabilities, they won't be employable much longer. And if they're not employable, we're headed for some real difficulties.
Yeah, I see the Ziggy Starman piece behind you, so that's a good segue into the art collection. Prolific art collection, over 1,600 pieces. I've been through the website. The website's a bit retro, I've got to say.
Well, I actually use it because we one of the things that we do is we make donations each year to schools and to museums, and it's a handy way for them to sort of cull the collection and say, we'd like this piece or that piece. We just, as a matter of fact, I think you mentioned we did an auction recently, and that is to sort of replenish our foundation, which then gives grants and scholarships to practicing artists. So that's part of the whole process.
So I'm a bit of a Sunday hack art collector myself. So I do appreciate not to the level of your collection. So how do you collect 1,600 pieces, and obviously you donate them, and it's a philanthropic purpose that it serves, but what do? Do you visit galleries? Do you see pieces?
Well, again, this is exactly, I feel like my life is structured in the same way in the business context, in the investment context, and in the art context. And the first word is always, how do you apply a filter that makes these things manageable? And honestly, if we tried to keep up with all of the art that was being produced, if we tried to keep up with dead artists and living artists, if we tried to keep up with abstract artists and landscape artists, so we have a very finite set of filters. It's living artists, it's the figure, it's contemporary realist art. When you slice it down to that, it becomes almost manageable. And then you need to use the shows, these big art shows, as sort of concentrators and conveners. It's very efficient for me to go to Miami. I'll be in Miami in December. I walk those shows in a day and a half. I see maybe 200 galleries. And because of the web, because of the internet, we are constantly solicited for new work by the artists in the collection. We generally try to find new artists and not go deep with artists that we already own a good example of their work. But it's a business. And when I say it's a business, I mean it's 10 or 20 hours a month devoted to trying to keep up with it and be responsive to various things that are going on. And we work with galleries in maybe a dozen cities. We work with museums in maybe a dozen cities and in 4 or 5 countries. And the goal, again, is to promote the careers of these artists. And also, by the way, to support them while they're trying to make a living and while they're trying to become recognized. Artists, it's a very hard living. It's very much entrepreneurial in the sense that you sit down there with a blank canvas, and it's no different than sitting down there and saying, I'm going to start a business. And so, I feel a great affinity to them. I also love to have the physical art here because the digital world can become very sterile very quickly. We learned that at Flashpoint. So having physical art and having the kids understand that there are levels and ways of excellence that aren't simply something you do with your fingers and your keyboard was important. It was an important message. Yeah.
Excellent message. And I do love that Starman piece behind you. Big Bowie fan. So, Howard, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can take some of your experiences into our Australian ecosystem.
Great. Well, I enjoy it, and a lot of the information is available at tullman.blogspot.com, and then at my website, which is just tullman.com. But thanks for the opportunity, and it was great to meet you virtually, and we will talk to you again soon.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Howard.
Bye.